Herbert Clark Hoover, born on August 10, 1874, in West Branch, Iowa, was the 31st President of the United States, serving from 1929 to 1933. A self-made businessman, humanitarian, and public servant, Hoover's presidency is most closely associated with the Great Depression, a global economic downturn that began shortly before he took office and worsened during his tenure. Despite his earlier successes, Hoover's handling of the Depression, along with the unprecedented scale of the crisis, tarnished his legacy, though his contributions before and after the presidency remain significant. Hoover was born to Jesse and Huldah Hoover, both of whom died when he was young, leaving him an orphan by the age of 9. He was raised by his uncle, John Minthorn, in Oregon. Hoover excelled in school, ultimately enrolling in Stanford University in 1891, where he earned a degree in geology in 1895. After graduation, Hoover worked as a mining engineer, first in the United States and then in Australia and China. His success in mining led him to amass considerable wealth, and he quickly earned a reputation as a skilled businessman with a talent for organizational management. In 1899, Hoover married Lou Henry, a fellow Stanford graduate and a strong influence in his life. They had 2 sons, Herbert Jr. and Alan. The Hoovers shared an interest in public service and humanitarian work, a partnership that defined much of his career. During World War I, Hoover's humanitarian efforts became a defining feature of his public life. In 1914, as Europe plunged into war, Hoover led the American Relief Administration, ARA, a volunteer organization that provided food aid to millions of people in Belgium and northern France. His efficiency and ability to coordinate large-scale relief efforts garnered international admiration. In 1917, when the United States entered the war, President Woodrow Wilson appointed Hoover as the head of the U.S. Food Administration. Hoover's role involved overseeing food conservation efforts to ensure supplies for American troops and European civilians. His slogan, "Food will win the war," became widely recognized. Hoover's leadership in these roles earned him a reputation as a competent and effective administrator. After the war, Hoover continued his humanitarian efforts, particularly in helping war-torn Europe. His reputation as a global philanthropist and skilled manager led many to view him as a capable public servant who could tackle difficult national challenges. In 1921, Hoover was appointed Secretary of Commerce under President Warren G. Harding, a position he held throughout the Harding and Calvin Coolidge administrations. In this role, Hoover expanded the scope of the Commerce Department, focusing on areas such as aviation, radio communication, and highway construction. He promoted voluntary cooperation between businesses and government to regulate economic activity and promote growth. His efforts in promoting business efficiency, encouraging technological advancement, and developing the infrastructure of the United States earned him a reputation as a forward-thinking and innovative public servant. Herbert Hoover ran for president in 1928 as the Republican candidate, positioning himself as the candidate of prosperity, progress, and American individualism. He won the election by a landslide, defeating Democrat Alfred E. Smith, the governor of New York. Hoover's victory was largely attributed to his reputation as a successful businessman and his optimistic vision of continued prosperity. However, Hoover's presidency was overshadowed by the onset of the Great Depression. Just months after he took office in March 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed on October 29, 1929, sending the economy into a downward spiral. Unemployment skyrocketed, banks failed, and businesses shuttered. The Depression would persist throughout Hoover's term, leading to widespread poverty, hunger, and homelessness. Hoover initially believed in a limited role for the federal government in addressing economic crises, emphasizing voluntary efforts by businesses and local governments to alleviate suffering. He resisted direct federal intervention, fearing it would erode American individualism and self-reliance. He advocated for public works programs, such as the construction of the Hoover Dam, to provide jobs and stimulate the economy, but these efforts were insufficient to reverse the economic collapse. The most controversial episode of Hoover's presidency came in 1932, when the Bonus Army, a group of World War I veterans demanding early payment of their bonuses, marched on Washington, D.C. Hoover ordered the military to disperse the protesters, resulting in violent clashes. The incident damaged Hoover's public image and further diminished his popularity. As the Depression deepened, Hoover's inability to address the crisis led to growing discontent. In the 1932 election, Hoover was defeated in a landslide by Franklin D. Roosevelt, who promised a New Deal to combat the economic collapse. After leaving the White House, Hoover retreated to his home in California. Despite his electoral defeat, he remained active in public life. He became an advocate for policies to address the long-term effects of the Depression and supported Roosevelt's New Deal programs, although he disagreed with the scope of government intervention. Hoover also played a role in organizing relief efforts during and after World War II, aiding in the recovery of European countries devastated by the war. Hoover remained a respected figure in the Republican Party, although his association with the Depression years prevented him from regaining significant political influence. He authored numerous books, including his memoirs, and worked on various projects related to the welfare of the United States and global stability. Hoover's post-presidency years were marked by a determined effort to rehabilitate his public image. He died on October 20, 1964, at the age of 90. Despite the controversies of his presidency, Hoover's contributions as a humanitarian, businessman, and public servant are still recognized today. His leadership during the early 20th century, especially in the fields of humanitarian aid and public administration, left a lasting impact on American society and foreign relations. Herbert Hoover's legacy remains complex. While his presidency is often remembered for its failure to effectively respond to the Great Depression, his earlier work in humanitarian aid, infrastructure, and public service has been significant. His life story is a testament to the challenges and complexities of leadership during times of national crisis, as well as the potential for redemption and continued service after political defeat.